by what they say and what they do. Character-based leadership is the bedrock requirement for a successful command climate. Commanders send clear messages to their units by the way they do simple things and the things they check or fail to check, an arms room inventory, a material readiness report, appropriate use of rules of engagement and escalation of force, timely and accurate reporting of checkpoints, and so on. For example, leaders who give cursory attention to the importance of accurate and ethical reporting, training to standard, discipline under fire, and treatment of non-combatants set a command climate that is prone to failure or worse. An ethical command climate is essential in preventing troops from committing acts that endanger their hold on their own humanity. Even a great officer cannot literally oversee every action that his or her troops take. As Christopher Kalena observes in Leadership, the Warrior's Art, this is especially true in modern warfare, with its diverse components and increased autonomy of small units and individuals. Only when results and values exist in a complementary relationship will the organization develop a healthy culture and a positive command climate. When leaders, peers, and subordinates possess the discipline to function within these standards, an environment of trust is forged. In modern combat, a platoon leader, never mind a general, might not even see a large part of his force until the battle is over. So trust, the implicit understanding that senior, peer, and subordinate alike are doing their absolute best to accomplish the mission in the right way, forms the bedrock of organizational effectiveness. Discipline forms trust, bringing with it a level of maturity that is necessary to develop and practice independence and initiative. Recently, a corrupt command climate was cited as a major contributing factor to the shameful treatment of prisoners by American MPs at the Abu Ghraib detention center in Iraq. An independent panel concluded that by not communicating standards, policies, and plans to soldiers, the commander of the MP battalion conveyed a sense of tacit approval of abusive behavior towards prisoners, and a lax and dysfunctional command climate took hold. In other words, by their actions and inactions, by giving commands or failing to say a word, and most of all, by their example, officers play a dramatic role in calibrating the moral compasses of their units. The worst will pollute the minds of their troops with hateful speech and behavior that dehumanizes the enemy. They reject the warrior's code altogether, embracing war as an opportunity to act outside the norms of society, seemingly with impunity. Such leaders can contaminate the moral reasoning of their subordinates, causing them to question their basic values and override any pangs of conscience. The best leaders, by contrast, champion the warrior's code even at the most difficult times, when its restraints increase the physical risk to their troops. Taking the initiative, they talk to their troops in advance of the most challenging engagements and acknowledge the temptation to set the code aside for expediency's sake, and reaffirm the importance of holding on to basic principles that underlie the difference between warriors and murderers. When mistakes are made, because they will be made, they offer transgressors a path back to redemption, rather than demanding perfection and destroying anyone who fails to meet an impossible standard. They recognize that allowing no second chances or redemption only makes cover-ups and other forms of deception more likely. If you throw people under the bus, pretty soon there's no one left in the bus. Falling outside these categories are jaded cynics who neither instigate atrocities nor aggressively act to prevent their troops from slipping the bounds of jus in bello constraints. They think the rules are mostly foolish, written far from the front lines by people who have never seen combat themselves. However, they are equally disgusted by true believers who use dogma to justify unnecessary violence, and they have no patience for personal quests of vengeance. There are also the deer in the headlights leaders, those who are too overwhelmed by their own responsibilities to accept the moral weight of their authority and take any stand at all. Leaders of the best type avoid all of these pitfalls and recognize that a vital component of a healthy command climate is providing subordinates meaningful motivation to honor a warrior's code. They must be made to feel that they are part of an elite organization that operates by strict standards that are consistently reinforced within the organization. They need to feel that they are heirs to a proud legacy, and that to act dishonorably is to betray that legacy and everyone who came before them. The idea of disgracing the uniform must be anathema to them. They must have pride in who they are as warriors and a passionate desire not to embarrass their service or their nation. Rules and regulations appeal to the head, but leaders have to appeal to the heart as well. They have to help their followers care about doing the right thing. After all, it is our troops who are the ones who will be damaged, along with their victims, if they overstep moral boundaries. And for those who have defined religious beliefs, the code must be expressed in terms that make sense to them within that belief structure. We have to do the hard work of making connections between the need to follow certain ROEs and each individual's existing core beliefs. Doing so enhances the troops' physical safety in most cases, because they are not having their professional judgment clouded by blind rage, and they're not being made the target of hatred themselves. And perhaps most importantly, they are not underestimating the enemy through lack of respect. One challenge that has become particularly pernicious for U.S. military leaders in recent years is keeping ethical signals clear when they are forced to work side by side with PMCs, or private military contractors, essentially mercenaries, who do not share the same values. There are well over 100 active private military contractor firms, and they provide widely varied services from security guards and bodyguards to logistics, to catering, to training in military tactics and use of equipment, to cybersecurity. Some serve established governments, notably the US, which deployed tens of thousands of private military contractors to Iraq, many of them notoriously from the firm that was formerly known as Blackwater, now called Z, while others effectively function as private armies for multinational corporations, for example, guarding personnel and construction projects in unstable nations, and at times even battling rebel or terrorist groups on behalf of their employer. Still others are employed by non-state actors, such as warlords, or even by multinational organizations. For example, the UN once hired the PMC Executive Outcomes to provide logistical support for humanitarian operations in Africa. Traditionally, uniformed troops dislike and mistrust mercenaries. In September 2005, Brigadier General Karl Horst, deputy commander of the 3rd Infantry Division that was charged with Baghdad's security after the 2003 invasion, said of Dime Corps and other PMCs in Iraq, and this is a quote, "These guys run loose in this country and do stupid stuff. There's no authority over them, so you can't come down on them hard when they escalate force. They shoot people, and someone else has to deal with the aftermath, and it happens all over the place." Reactions to PMCs can go far beyond dislike. Colonel Ted Westhuizen was a professor who taught ethics and literature at West Point. He was deployed to Iraq, where he served with a unit that was actually composed primarily of PMCs. The level of corruption that the colonel observed was literally more than he could bear. Seeing the values that he taught at West Point flagrantly violated by the very commanders who should have been promoting and defending them drove him to take his own life. And I'd like to read you the suicide note left by Colonel Ted Westhuizen to his commanding officers. You are only interested in your career and provide no support to your staff, no mission support, and you don't care. I didn't volunteer to support corrupt, money-grubbing contractors, nor work for commanders only interested in themselves. Death before being dishonored anymore. Trust is essential, and I don't know who to trust anymore. Why serve when you cannot accomplish the mission, when you no longer believe in the cause, when your every effort and breath to succeed meets with lies, lack of support, and selfishness? No more. Reevaluate yourselves, commanders. You are not what you think you are, and I know it. I do not share Colonel Westhuizen's story with you to suggest that all PMCs are corrupt. Of course, that is not true. But the reality is that maintaining a strong warrior's code is not easy under the best of conditions. We certainly should not adopt policies that make it even harder. We ask our young men and women in uniform to exhibit extraordinary restraint and control of their emotions day after day. And most of them exceed our expectations. We should not demean their efforts and sacrifices by asking them to work with individuals who are motivated primarily by profit. Ted Westhuizen was the direct casualty of a corrupt command climate. For him, seeing the warrior's code sullied was a fate worse than death. The timeless challenge that all leaders must face is the one that Sergeant Davis spoke of that day to my Code of the Warrior mids. That of remembering that physical risks are not the only ones faced in combat zones, that they need to be protecting the Ted Westhuizens of this world as well, that in fact, physical risks may not even be the most important. Moral and even spiritual risks can and perhaps should matter more. In 2001, a story came to the public's attention about then-Senator Robert Carey, who served in the elite U.S. Navy SEALs during the Vietnam War. Journalist Gregory Vistica conducted an extensive and soul-searching interview of Senator Carey, in which he revealed the anguish he continues to suffer even decades later as a result of having killed non-combatants. As an inexperienced 25-year-old lieutenant, Carey led a commando team on a raid of an isolated peasant hamlet in Vietnam's eastern Mekong Delta. While witnesses and the official records give varying accounts of exactly what happened, one thing is certain. Around midnight in February of 1969, Carey and his men killed at least 13 unarmed women and children. The operation was brutal. For months afterwards, Carey says he feared going to sleep at night because of the terrible nightmares that haunted him. The restless nights are mostly behind him now, and his dreams about Vietnam are more reflective. One of those, which he says recurs frequently, is about an uncle who disappeared from action during World War II. In my dream, I'm about to leave for Vietnam, Carey wrote in an email message. He warns me that the greatest danger of war is not losing your life, but the taking of others' lives, and that human savagery is a very slippery slope. Carey says he has spent the last 3 decades wondering if he could have done something differently that night in Vietnam. It's far more than guilt, he has written. It is shame. It's the thought that you can never, ever get away from.